Same old man. Game over.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
Why so serious?
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the In Session Film Podcast.
Welcome to this podcast review for April 1st, 2025, and I'm JD Duran.
And I'm Brennan Cassidy.
Hey, thanks for joining us, everybody. We are simply two working men here to talk about a working man.
Say it right, JD. We
doing a
are
hard day's work.
we are working men. Gotta add that
All working men.
Gotta add that
Gotta add the I am deeply falling in love with this trend, Brendan. I hope this continues, where we get these movies starring Jason Statham in titles that ultimately have nothing to do with the movie.
Right.
We have
right.
A Working Man. We have The Beekeeper. I'm thinking of those two specifically. I want him to just keep making movies that describe him so superficially, but ultimately have nothing to do with the film whatsoever. I want more of that. I want the next film. Jason Statham stars in Chef, and he's a chef for like a minute and a half in the film, and then just goes off.
He might just use kitchen knives as his weapon of choice. That's really the only difference.
Exactly.
I mean, we are apparently getting a sequel to The Beekeeper, so maybe they'll title that one a little bit differently. Maybe in that one he'll be, I don't know, the wasp herder or something like that instead.
Yeah, I want them to keep doing that. Yeah, just keep making movies with titles that don't really describe him. That I'm loving that trend. I think it's the greatest.
I'm just loving the trend that we're getting more movies like this that people are latching on to. Like the whole, I guess, like Dudes Rock kind of movie, right?
Dudes
I mean,
Rock.
because earlier this year we had Den of Thieves Pantera, which was actually very effective. I feel like
Really
we're
like
getting
that
more
movie,
of these now. Yeah, it's these like mid-budget movies that feel very 90s and like early 2000s. I kind of miss that.
I miss that a lot as well. And look, you and I might not be the only ones, because this film did win the weekend box office, as it made $16.7 million in its opening weekend.
It's not a real high number, but given what it had to compete with, I mean, yeah, I could see why it went to number one. And to your point, I think you said you saw this in a rather packed house.
I did. I went to my local AMC, and granted, it wasn't the IMAX theater. It wasn't one of the biggest ones they have there.
Gotcha.
But still, regardless, the showing that I was at completely sold out. Wholly sold out. Not a single empty seat in the whole thing, which I thought was exciting. The people love their Jason Stathams as the beekeepers and the working mans. The blue collar guy. Everyone loves a Jason Statham.
These movies are only a year apart. I'm sure Jason Statham and David Ayer are working together on another one already. That might not even be The Beekeeper 2.
No doubt about it. And you make a good point, because David Ayer also directed The Beekeeper. So I think what I'm trying to say is, going back to what I said earlier, there was a missed opportunity. David Ayer understood. He understood immediately, because in 2020 he had The Tax Collector.
Oh my
missed
gosh.
opportunity.
Huge
Missed opportunity, because that wasn't about Jason Statham being Jason Statham. And as a result, that film did not work out all that great for David Ayer. But The Tax Collector, that's a perfect title for what I'm saying. You slap that on Jason Statham, he's the tax collector. And then the movie proceeds to do nothing with him being a tax collector.
This is a fun game. Let's think of some professions to put Jason Statham in that he doesn't do at all in the movie, but it's his sort of like thing that he does for 5 minutes. The pediatrician.
The pediatrician. That'll be the next one. I just hope they keep doing that, is what I'm saying.
Oh, I would be down for that.
David Ayer, he learned his lesson. After The Tax Collector, he does The Beekeeper, and now A Working Man. And His last two, I'm all down for it. Him and Statham should keep working together, as far as I'm concerned. Ayer has had such a weird filmography.
I don't get him. I don't get it. Like, I really don't. I mean, there's clearly consistency. Like, I could sense his aesthetic choices as a director. I can sense certain things that he does in all of his movies, but his track record is so flimsy. And I mean, like it wavers. He'll make something as compelling as Fury, and then follow that up with Bright, which I guess Suicide Squad technically followed that up, but that barely even counts. I mean, he's been very vocal about that.
Yeah, look, I think Fury and End of Watch are two of the best films of their given years, especially Fury. I think is
a good movie.
Phenomenal. That film is so absurdly good.
That's
but you
probably
are right
Ayer's
that
best.
that those films are intertwined with Sabotage and Bright and The Tax Collector, which are just not very good movies at all. And I'll give him a pass on Suicide Squad. That obviously is not his movie at all for all the reasons that have become public.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just I don't know what to expect out of him. And then with these last two films, it's like he's reined in some ambition to just kind of play into the Jason Statham of it all. But that's not necessarily a bad thing.
I think he's realizing where his strengths are, which is just making very lean and mean thrillers like this.
Yeah.
And he's two in a row where he's cutting out the fat. He's getting right to the point. His movies spend, as we jokingly said, 3 minutes or so of Jason Statham as a quote unquote working man or as a beekeeper, and then it means nothing else for the rest of the movie.
Nothing for the rest of the movie. It's just so funny to me.
Yeah.
I just want that to continue.
In fact, here, like
forever.
the title, A Working Man, that opens it up is very crucial to showcase how ordinary of a man that he technically is, when this movie clearly establishes that he is not an ordinary man. He's a very gifted man at what he does.
As we would expect.
There's a little bit of irony here with that title choice.
Absolutely. All right, let's get into it. A Working Man. It is directed by David Ayer. Do you know who wrote this alongside David Ayer?
Well, I do, because I saw the movie. I did not know who co-wrote this movie when I walked into the theater, and then I saw Sylvester Stallone's name pop up in the opening credits.
Crazy. I had no idea either. I had no idea. I knew that it was Ayer. I knew that it was Statham. That was enough for me. Mm-hmm. You could have given me a million guesses, and I would have never have picked Sylvester Stallone as the co-writer.
Well, it's interesting because this does feel like a Stallone type of movie in some ways.
For sure.
Like, it's very much in the tradition of not even the First Blood series, but it's also kind of in the vein of The Expendables in some ways too. So it feels like something Stallone would have tried to maybe make and star in back in the 90s.
Oh, for sure.
Which in a way kind of gives it its charm.
Yeah. I mean, he's listed as a producer here as well. Mm-hmm. I did not know that going into the movie, but understandably, I could see him as a producer on a movie like this.
Sure.
A co-screenwriting credit, though, wouldn't have guessed that. Wouldn't have guessed.
I kind of like Stallone as a writer. I kind of like Stallone as a writer. There are a few films that he has. I mean, obviously, he was very heavily tied to. I mean, when I say heavily tied, I mean he was the Rocky franchise. But when the Creed films started coming out, he obviously didn't direct those movies, but he also was a major screenwriter on Creed 2, which I thought was a very underrated movie. So he knows story. He does know those things. I think he's actually pretty underrated as a writer.
Now, I don't disagree. I just thought that was kind of funny and unexpected. At any rate, A Working Man, directed by David Ayer. It stars Jason Statham and a bunch of other people that mostly do not matter. However,
David Harbour's in this movie for literally 2 minutes.
Well, that is ultimately where I was going with this. Because
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to steal your thunder.
David Harbour and Michael Pena are also listed here, but both of them have maybe 2 minutes of screen time. Maybe. And that's being generous. I don't know why they're here other than to slap their names on the poster. That's ultimately all that they're here for, because they mean nothing to this film. It really is Statham and just a bunch of guys, just a bunch of dudes. They come and go throughout the film. That is it. So if you're not familiar with A Working Man, it is about Levon Cade, Jason Statham, if you will. He left his profession behind to work construction and be a good dad to his daughter. But when a local girl vanishes, he's asked to return to the skills that made him a mythic figure in the shadowy world of counter-terrorism. All right, Brendan, what did you think about A Working Man?
I had fun. With this one. I want to see David Ayer do more of these. I will say I don't like it quite as much as The Beekeeper. I actually think that one is a bit tighter and more efficient as this type of movie is essentially trying to be. A Working Man does get very messy. There's a whole middle section here where Levon Cade is infiltrating this drug business to get closer to this girl that he's trying to save, and it actually means absolutely nothing to how the movie plays out, which I guess is kind of the point, but there is definitely more of a messiness to this one. And it's also playing more into the kind of the goofiness of its backdrop. The way it treats these Russian gangsters is so over the top to the point of just straight up cartoonishness. And sometimes that doesn't always jive with the earnestness that Jason Statham has with Michael Pena's family and how and why he's being tasked with this mission. So there is a bit of a mishmash of tones here that maybe isn't quite as seamless as something like The Beekeeper, but I still had fun. And I think a lot of it is because I'm just kind of excited to see more mid-budget movies like this that are very reminiscent of late 90s, early 2000s action thrillers that didn't really require a big budget, that really just got by on a very charismatic and edgy star. And that's ultimately all you needed. I think in that regard, it's a very efficient movie for its kind. And I enjoyed it for those reasons, because I just like to see more movies like this.
Yep. I really have nothing else to add here. I think this film is a lot of fun. I enjoyed the hell out of it. Jason Statham doing Jason Statham things. It's really great. Again, I just love how we get those opening very few scenes, those opening 2 or 3 scenes where he's at the construction site doing the construction thing. And even at the construction site, they can't help themselves. We have to have a fight there as well. Like, we have to establish that he is this ex-Marine who means business.
Yeah.
That also has to happen at the construction site. So it's just so funny.
I mean, because Michael Pena has to see it.
Yeah, exactly. Not even Michael Pena. Well, I guess he does see it, but that might explain or speak to the messiness of the film that you're talking about, because there's the fight that in the aftermath of Michael Pena's character, his name is Joe, his daughter apparently witnesses this, right? Because she approaches Levon to be like, oh my God, that was incredible. I didn't know that you could do that. But he's like, yeah, he literally tells her, Levon tells her, don't tell anyone. Nothing happened. You didn't see anything. And then she disappears. And the next thing we know is that Joe is like, oh, you're a Marine. Like,
you can do this.
Like, he knew.
That's the thing.
He just somehow knew.
Like The Beekeeper, this is a movie that's really trying to trim the fat and just get right to the point. This one, I think, maybe gets to the point a little bit too quickly for its own good at times. Yeah, there could have been a little bit more fat. Nice. Yeah, and that's why I think a movie like The Beekeeper is a little bit more efficient in a way. But still, like, both of these movies are very fun and successful as just thrilling experiences for what they're trying to do.
Yeah, and look, those are small quibbles. I'm not here to cinema sins this thing. I don't care to have that conversation. But it is funny. It's just funny how the film is a little messy and how it's trying to tighten its nuts and bolts a little bit in that regard. But given what this film is, and we know what we're walking into, that's easy to forgive. But you do see the messiness there for sure. And you can recognize that. Same thing with what you're talking about when Levon understands that he has to get close to another one of these Russian mafia figures. He hears a name and knows that that's his next target.
Yeah.
Somehow Levon understands that this guy is a drug lord, but we as the audience, are 3 steps behind. We don't know that. So when he starts making these moves to get into the drug world, we're all like, why? Like, what is going on here? It feels a bit strange. Like, it kind of makes sense. The connective tissue does have cogency, but the explaining of why he's making these choices is kind of left up in the air. Like, we just
have to roll with it.
Uneven.
We
You just
kind of have to roll with it.
Yeah.
He makes a phone call to one of his buddies that also works in the FBI very conveniently, so he does get some starter information. But yeah, you're right. There are many instances where we're so many steps behind him, and that he spends so much time very casually infiltrating this drug business when I feel like the real Jason Statham would just beat up his way through that and get to the answer more quickly. So there's a lot of wheel spinning here because we also have to spend some time with Jenny, the young girl who is kidnapped, played by Ariana Rivas. And I actually think she's pretty good here. I actually like the scenes with her and her kidnappers. We actually get a whole side story there that is kind of fun to watch, and she's very tough as nails. I kind of like watching her fight back the way that she does. So you could definitely see where the film is trying to spin its wheels to keep its momentum going, and in some of those instances you notice how messy it can ultimately be.
Yeah, no, I agree. It is a little messy in that regard, but I didn't really mind it. I was just having so much fun with Statham doing his thing, you know, using technology to find out who his next target is going to be. And I do love, ultimately, I know we're criticizing the film and having some fun joking about how it's maybe tightened its nuts and bolts a little too much, but I also love the pragmatism. You know, this film is not messing around or trying to be melodramatic with its action at all, which I do love. Like,
it's very visceral.
Moment, there's that moment when he goes to that, you know, the Russian mob boss house early on in the film, and he sees him slap his wife and she leaves. He takes care of 1 or 2 of the guards outside, and that's it. And then he's in the house and he's meeting up with them. Like, there's just no messing around. Like,
I love that scene.
Love that.
Like that's another actor that, of course, we'll recognize because we've seen so many movies. Jason Fleming plays that Russian mobster that he essentially tortures in that scene. But that's really the only scene he has in the movie. And if you've seen the trailer, it's the one where he's tied to a chair hanging over the indoor pool.
Yeah, they use it in the trailer a lot. Yeah.
And if you know Jason Statham at all, you know what he's going to do to this man.
Yeah.
And it's still very satisfying to watch.
Yeah, extremely satisfying. I love how all of that plays out. A lot of the action plays out that way. There's no messing around. It just gets right to it.
It's very tangible, which I like.
Very tangible. Even as the actual physicality, the action, how that unfolds, there's no melodrama to it. There's no lingering on certain elements. It all plays out rather quick and brief. And if it does linger on anything, it might be an exchange that Levon has with another character. Like, for example, at the end of the film, we get this huge bombastic action sequence. And there's a moment where Levon is trying to, or he is up against this other opponent who's big and intimidating and also an ex-army soldier. I'm trying to think of the character's name. I'd have to look it up. I can't remember.
Yeah, keep talking. I'll find it for you.
But for those that have seen the film, you know what I'm talking about. He's one of the characters that Levon has to meet and convince that he is serious about the drug business, so that way he can get in and get closer to one of his central targets that he's trying to find. And he comes across this guy at the very end of the film. And there's one brief exchange where this character, he is trying to intimidate Levon and he's like, "What's your real name?" And so then, you know, Cade tells him what his name is. And that's it. Like, that's the exchange. And in the hands of a lot of other filmmakers, this is a fight that is prolonged. It's one of the big baddies of the film. So, this is going to be like a 10-minute sequence, just this fight. And they're going to go back and forth. And it's going to be like a wrestling match. He tells him his name, and that fight is over in about 10 seconds. And that's it. Like it's all done.
Yeah, I believe that's the Tobias Garrett character played by Wayne Gordon. I think that's who it was. But yeah, I like how simple that it resolves itself in that way.
Yeah, I love that, right? Because he is posited in the film as one of the central baddies here, right? Like he has his own little room at this bar that you have to have the password to get into, sort of a thing. And he's sitting on a throne, and he kind of runs the drug business in this little area where they are. And so like the film kind of posits him as like one of these central figures. Yeah. Now when you juxtapose him to the Demi character, Demi at one point says that he's small fish and I'm the big fish, or whatever he says there. But still, I mean, he's kind of this imposing figure. And at one point, he does tell Cade that he is also former military. So they have that in common, which is foreshadowing, of course.
I also have to fact check myself. It was Chidi Ejiofor who plays the Dutch character. That's who we're talking about here. So yeah, I picked the wrong name up.
Yeah, understandable. And so I just love that you have this other military figure, this imposing, physical, intimidating figure. And then, they get to that fight at the end, 10 seconds. That's it. It does not prolong itself at all. Like just that kind of pragmatism to the film is great. I love that.
I think David Ayer should make more of these. I really do. I think they're fun. I'm really enjoying this. It's kind of nostalgic in a way, right? I remember going to the movies with my dad, seeing movies like this that were just very lean, very mean. And I like when it gets to that final act, it still feels very visceral, like we're talking about. It's not reliant on modern technology to streamline it or make it too clean. And as much as I say I think I preferred The Beekeeper as a movie, there's one instance earlier in that movie where Jason Statham blows up an entire building. And it is not a convincing shot. It is not convincing at all. And I remember seeing that movie, given the tangibility of that movie overall, and seeing that explosion and just thinking, well, that was unfortunate. There's none of that here. This is actually a very well-staged movie as far as it functioning as an action film. And that was nice to see.
Yeah. I mean, I think what's great about this film, I mean, there's nothing all that surprising about it. It's essentially Taken, but with your boss's daughter instead of your own. But there's this subplot with his own daughter and trying to get custody of her, which is ultimately, there's really not much to that here. It's just a side conflict, I guess, that kind of tries to raise the stakes a little bit because he's dealing with the Russian mafia, and there's talk about how they're going to kill your whole family, generations of them, if you mess with them, sort of a thing. So we have to introduce that element of the film. That's ultimately all that's there for. But, it's very basic. We know what we're walking into. What I'm trying to say, though, I think what's interesting about the film is that it kind of has this old school mentality to it that you're talking about that is really great. And usually, like these days, it's really hard to get these films into theaters.
Oh yeah,
most of the time,
this is a dumping ground for streaming. You're right.
It goes straight to streaming, straight to Amazon Max, whatever it may be. And the fact that this went to theaters, and I think that's why I am kind of excited about it doing somewhat well financially. I mean, it's grossed worldwide at this point $33 million on a $40 million budget in 1 week.
That's not a bad start. Yeah, hopefully it has legs.
Yes. If Amazon, who I think this is distributed through, it's MGM through Amazon. If they let this sit in theaters for a while, it might be able to make its money back. It might take some weeks. I don't think it's going to happen next weekend. No. But if MGM lets this linger out linger around for 60, 90 days, it might be able to make some money. And a movie like this these days, going to theaters and being successful like that, it's like a rare success story, it feels like.
Isn't that what we often talk about? We want to see movies that are mid-budget doing well, because that's when we notice movies actually utilizing their budget smartly, and they're not releasing movies that are upwards of like $300 million of a budget, which means they have to make almost $1 billion essentially in order to just break even.
Yeah.
Like, that's ridiculous. That's a stupid gamble. And I
Yeah.
think we need more movies like this to balance out those other types of successes, those other types of successes. And more often than not, these movies that are mid-budget, they have this tangibility to them because they are a bit more restricted with what you can get away with behind the scenes. They tend to feel more grounded, and we actually can notice that grounded nature that takes us back to how movies used to be made. And that's exactly what this movie does. It took me back to a time when movies used to actually look like movies and didn't look like content. Honestly, the higher the budget you have, the more likely a movie is going to look like CGI soup, as you like to call it. And this doesn't look like that.
And that's a really great point. I do love the tangibility of this film. This was a movie made to go to the cinemas, and it is telling, especially when you compare it to something like The Electric State, as we've talked about before, which was clearly meant to be on Netflix for you to consume as you're making dinner and you're not even watching the goddamn movie. It's ridiculous. This film, they want you to go see in theaters. Clearly, it is shot that way. And I think that certainly adds to the fun, and that's why it has this old school mentality to it. That makes it really fun. You know, it doesn't have to be sophisticated. It's not nuanced. It's nothing more than it presents itself to be. But that's why we go to the theaters to see these movies. And clearly there's still an appetite for it, given
it's the right kind of mindlessness.
Yeah, exactly. And I think Ayer does a good job of fully realizing that here and having fun. And sure, yes, it's a little messy along the way. More so than something like The Beekeeper, but it's not too far off from The Beekeeper in that regard.
No, it's like if I'm going to rank,
it's still very successful.
If I'm going to rank David Ayer's films, I think The Beekeeper and this one are pretty close to each other.
It's still very much up there, yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm with you. Fury and End of Watch, probably his two best films. I admittedly haven't seen his first film, Harsh Times, with Christian Bale, but I've heard pretty good things about that one. But I wouldn't be surprised if The Beekeeper and A Working Man end up being ranked next to each other if I were to ever finish his filmography.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, yeah. And honestly, it's not really even close as far as I'm concerned. It's Fury, it's End of Watch, and then those two movies. Although I'd have to go back and I'd have to see Harsh Times. I haven't seen Harsh Times.
I haven't seen that. Have you seen Street Kings?
I have. It's been a long time, but I've seen Street Kings as well. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's been a long time for me as well. And I remember thinking that was okay.
It was okay. Yeah, that's ultimately, that's where I'm on it. Yeah, it's okay.
But yeah, I guess we're going to get more of these because I did mention apparently The Beekeeper 2 is happening. And without getting too much into spoilers here, A Working Man does kind of set up a sequel.
It does. Yep.
Yeah.
And I mean, if you're going to have David Harbour in your film, although I don't know how you utilize that character in a sequel either. It's just funny how Michael Pena and David Harbour are in this film for combined 3 minutes. It's just so funny.
I mean, well, it's a perfect opportunity. The Working Men is the sequel here, and they can join the fun.
Yeah, again, given the background of Harbour's character, I'm not sure how you do that. And this should just go way over the top. He just becomes Daredevil. You know what I mean?
I do wonder about that. Yeah, if they're able to, realistically get around that. I'm not really sure, but I'd certainly be interested in seeing that.
Yeah, I'd be interested as well. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, fun movie. Fun movie.
At any rate, Working Man, great. I would recommend it. Go check it out. Please help make this film successful. I just hope that Amazon keeps this in theaters for a while. It's funny, as we're talking, CinemaCon is going on right now in Las Vegas. And I want to say earlier today, as we are recording this, although this episode will probably go out on Thursday, so it was a couple of days ago as the audience is hearing this, but there was a panel about the state of the industry, and there was a guy on stage talking about how using data and analytics that Hollywood would be much better off if they let movies stay in theaters longer. So instead of panicking and going to streaming after 20 days, if you let movies stay, like have a theatrical window of 90 days, for example, which other countries do.
Yeah.
The box office is flourishing better in those countries, or when movies do have that longer theatricality. And it's like, well, who would have thought?
I mean, yeah, I understand
Like,
it costs. I understand it costs more money to keep it in theaters for a longer period of time, but you could easily make that money back if you strategize it right and you keep it in there long enough, especially nowadays, given how the streaming wars have essentially taken over physical media. So I think it was Matt Damon that was talking about this some years ago, how the DVD release and the Blu-ray release was kind of like a second wind for a movie. It was the second release. It was a new chance for them to gain more revenue from that movie's success. But that doesn't really exist as much anymore.
No.
So by having it in theaters for only a few weeks, you're really doing the creators of these movies dirty.
Well, they are, because ultimately the studios don't necessarily need or want the theaters, or at least they're treating them as secondary.
Right.
They're like, they would much rather you pay a bunch of money to go to their streaming service than go to the theaters. They want to cut out the middleman. That's what they want to do.
And they want budget certainty, because a lot of those subscriptions are reoccurring bills that they have coming in. Yeah.
Exactly. They want you, like, ultimately, in an ideal world, they want you to subscribe to their service, where over time they'll slowly but surely raise the price to where you're paying $40, $50 for a subscription, and that's how you're watching their movies, because it's not going to theaters anymore. Like, that's what they want, but they understand that culturally there's still a significance to the theaters. But they are undermining the theaters in that regard.
Yeah.
Which is why it's not shocking that, of course, if you have the movies in theaters for that long, and I don't know what the cost and analysis is for having movies in theaters from the studio's perspective, because most of the time these days it's all digital. So there's not much.
Well,
again, I might be speaking ignorantly in that regard, but it's not like what it used to be, when you'd have a billion reels go to all these theaters that you'd have to maintain and upkeep.
Well,
that's not what it is anymore.
The cost to maintain a movie in a theater for a long period of time, it can't be that bad, because if you think of how it used to be when we were kids, you get the main release in a major theater, but then it would trickle out into dollar theaters, smaller theaters. It was sort of like a decreasing kind of situation. And honestly, there was something also very charming about going to a dollar theater, in a very small scale, maybe indie kind of run theater, and seeing a movie that's no longer new, but not something you can rent either digitally or physically yet. Like, there was something kind of charming to be in that middle space, and that longevity in theaters still helped those movies profitably, and also helped the theaters, because you're going to see a cheaper movie. You're more willing to spend money on concessions then. So
I think any excuse from the studio's end, I don't really think it comes down to cost. I think it comes down to they want you on their streaming service. They want the
data. They want
the data, because I don't think the cost of having these movies in theaters it's pennies to them. I don't think it means anything these days. 20 years ago, different story. But these days, I don't think
it might mean more based on the sacrifice they'll have to eat of those who then maybe
it all comes down to that, for sure.
Yeah.
And they want to recoup that as much as possible. Now, to be fair, the one mystery in all of this is that I don't know, and it's because there's no transparency. We don't know how much these movies are making on the premium on demand.
Yeah.
Maybe there's enough money being made there that make sense of that transition before it goes to streaming. And that's the equivalent of the DVD purchase or the Blu-ray purchase that you were talking about a moment ago. Matt Damon. But we don't really know though. We don't really know. All we know is that most of the time these movies are not getting the 90-day theatrical window. They're there for a couple of weeks, up to maybe a month or two. And lo and behold, here comes analytics to say, yeah, if you left the movies in the theaters for 90 days, you're actually going to make a lot more money. Who would have thought?
Yeah. Well, you're also psychologically training audiences to not wait.
Well, and we're getting into a rabbit hole now. I do want to have this conversation on the main show at one point because
well, a movie like this is sparking that because this is a movie that is meant to be seen in theaters.
It is meant to be seen in theaters because there's so much debate right now about how to save the theaters and why don't you make good movies and have lower prices on snacks and movie tickets. And look, I'm not saying don't do those things. They would help, but I think that is a little bit, and I'm not pointing fingers at anybody. I just, generally speaking, I think that sentiment is a little myopic. I think it's much more nuanced than that.
That's too much of a generalization.
It's too much of a generalization. Like the hardest thing you have to do is, or to break through is, they have conditioned the studios, the major studios especially, have conditioned audiences to wait for streaming, to watch things on streaming.
Yeah.
People are addicted to their phones. I'm sorry, but cheaper movie tickets that's not going to cut it. You're going to have to do more than that.
Yeah. You have to train people into not thinking that they have everything at their fingertips. And that's really what this is. The idea that we have to wait for something, that it's not going to be readily available right at our fingerprints right off the bat. And too many people have been trained for that. And these short windows of movies playing in theaters is just adding to that mentality.
Yeah. And I don't know if the theaters economically can just afford to cut prices either. Like, to me, that's also a bit ignorant. Because like food prices have skyrocketed. Like paying labor in this country is a lot more than it ever used to be, and people should be paid for what they're worth. I very much believe that people should be paid for what they're worth. You couple that with the food prices, like even at wholesale, it's not cheap. It's not cheap. Like I think asking theaters to just have lower ticket prices and lower snack prices, and they are gouging a little bit. I'm not saying they can't afford to do a little bit.
They're trying to find the right balance.
But I think going as far as people are suggesting, it just isn't a reality. It's not with the way the economy is currently.
Would it help? Sure, but it's not a reality. To your point, better food at the movie theaters would certainly help. Cleaner conditions, better situations, and those kind of things. But you can't really blame the theaters that much, given how the economy is working and how theaters are suffering. They can't afford to take care of these things as much as they used to. So you can't really blame them. So, and as much as that would help, it's way more nuanced than that. It's not an easy fix by just saying, make these better, make these cheaper, give us more of these, give us less of these. There's going to be a cause and effect happening here, regardless of what action you take.
Yeah. And look, the gimmicky stuff they're doing right now, I think, is also kind of stupid. Like, no, I don't need a goddamn gym there. I don't need pickleball or whatever.
That's stupid. Yeah, that's the last thing I want.
Like, I don't need any of that either. Streamline the experience.
Let's add a casino in here. How about that?
Don't need that. I don't need to sports gamble next to my movie watching experience. Like, take away people's phones. Like, teach etiquette. I mean, I don't know. Like, I just streamline the experience. One thing that the theaters can do that would be really helpful: don't have 45 goddamn minutes of trailers.
That's where they got to start. That
they've
that is where
got
they
to
need
start
to
there.
start. That's the first
Like,
thing they need to start changing.
10 minutes, let's get the hell on, and let's get to a working man. I want to watch Jason Statham kick some guy's ass. I don't need to watch 45 minutes of
A
trailers.
Working Man is a movie that's under 2 hours long. And when I was looking at times for it on my Regal app, I'm seeing, okay, there's a showing here at 12. Okay, that's pretty good. What's after that? There's got to be like a 2 o'clock or something like that. No, the next one was 4 o'clock. It's just
Yeah.
like there's such a long gap there. It's because you have a nearly 2 hour movie. That means they need at least a 3 hour window to make sure that that entire experience is complete. That's just ridiculous.
It's crazy. No, it's insane. Like you don't need that. And
Mhm.
if you lower that window and you can get more screenings and hopefully more butts in the seats.
Yeah.
I would think, but what do I know? I don't run a movie theater.
Why I usually show up late to
That
movies
just makes
now.
sense to me, though.
Well, the other
Well,
thing
like-
too is, trailers used to be an exciting thing at the movies because they were kind of an exclusive sneak peek into something that was upcoming. But now every trailer is released online, and that's not going to change. So that there's no more surprise there anymore.
You just exactly. You used to have to go to the theaters to see those trailers, and that was the exclusive way to see them.
Yeah.
The internet has changed that, and we just don't need to see them. I
Yeah.
mean, even like you and I go to the movies all the time, so we see the same trailers over and over and over and over again, and that is a little bit irritating. But even beyond that, anyone has access to these trailers all the time.
Yeah.
All
And
the
that's not
time.
going to change. Like that's something we can't I hate to use the word fix because it's just a new generation. It's a new way of doing things. It's a new way of marketing. But I think theaters need to understand that. I remember back when I was a kid, I took my family to go and see that movie Scooby-Doo from 2002. And I only went because they announced they were going to play an early trailer for Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. That's the only reason why we went.
Yeah, people used to do that kind of stuff.
People
Yeah.
used to do that. I remember people flocking to the theater just to see some random movie they wouldn't have planned on seeing, just to see the trailer for Star Wars: The Phantom Menace.
Yeah, exactly. That was another big
Yeah.
one. Yeah, I mean, we now wait for those trailers to drop on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. And so that's how most people consume them anyway. I mean, when I'm at the theater, no one's paying attention to the trailers. They're on their phones half the time or talking to each other.
Yeah.
Like, you got to get rid of all of that. Just get to the movie. That is like, I'm not saying theaters can't, there are things theaters can do to help the experience. There's no doubt about it. But I think it's not going to be as easy as a lot of people have suggested. It's way more nuanced than that. Particularly with, you have to uncondition people to wait at home.
Yeah.
And, because the other thing we haven't mentioned here is that home theater systems are way more accessible than they've ever been.
Absolutely.
And so people are comfortable being at home. I don't have to get annoyed by people being on their phone. And thankfully, I had my hoodie when I was watching A Working Man because the lady next to me was on her phone the whole goddamn movie. The whole movie. Now, thankfully, I could put my hood up so I wasn't distracted. But what if I didn't?
I would have said something
like
at that
shit
point.
like that makes people want to watch movies at home. It's so brazen and consistent. It happens all the time, or people talking, and you just don't want to deal with that. I'm just going to wait for A Working Man to come home. So like we have to break that mold, and I don't think cheaper popcorn prices are gonna do it. It's gonna take some time and more than that.
It's got to be on the experience and not the additives to the experience. That's what we need to work on.
Yep.
Anyway, A Working Man, good movie.
Good movie. I really liked it a lot. Please go see it in theaters. We want these movies to be successful. Like, for all the talk and complaining about the industry that we do, I mean, ultimately, we love the cinema experience and we want to preserve it. We want to purify the experience and have it become something that is cultural once again.
Mm-hmm.
And it starts with a thriving industry. So go see A Working Man. Tell Hollywood that we want more of these. All right. With all of that said, if you agree or disagree with anything we had to say here, Leave a comment below if you're listening or if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky, you can email us insessionfilm@gmail.com. But we would love to hear from you either way. We have a review for the film Death of a Unicorn. I was going to say Death to the Unicorns, and I almost sobbed. I was like, that's not right.
No. We're pro unicorn on this
Unicorns
show.
are innocent, as we discussed.
I was just laughing because it sounded like you forgot the title for a moment, which I guess is emblematic of the film.
I did, because I was going to say it the wrong way. And I was like, no, it's Death of a Unicorn. I almost made it so much more worse than what it actually is.
Yeah, don't do that.
We don't want to do that. No. So we talked about that. It was a fun conversation. Episode 630, we talk about The Sound of Music. We continue our Best Picture movie series. We also talk about Marvel and their casting announcements, which I think was hilarious because when we recorded that a few nights ago, a lot of things were happening at CinemaCon, and we got a new Spider-Man title for the fourth film, which we did not know when we were recording that.
No, that came late. Yeah,
that came late. So we got Spider-Man Brand New Day. So maybe we'll have an addendum on next week's show.
Well,
to that
we're gonna have a lot to talk about on next week's show, given the news that dropped just before starting this recording, which apparently isn't an April Fool's joke.
Okay, so I was a little concerned. I wasn't sure if it was real or not. For the longest time, I wasn't sure.
If it's real,
it's a big deal.
It's a big deal. I'll save some thoughts later because I still want to make sure that it actually is real. But if it's not real,
exactly, I need to know that it's not. Yeah.
Because we're at a point now where any outlet can drop any story they want on April Fool's Day, and they can just have some fun with it. But we're not convinced. So what's the next thing that they can do? Maybe they could drop a story together and actually, join forces, put some teamwork into this to drop a fake story all at the same time. So then tomorrow morning, it's going to be like, gotcha. There is actually no sequel to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Yeah. I mean, it is probably real, but because we're recording this on April Fool's, you never know.
I don't know. Yeah.
You never know. At any rate, there'll be plenty to talk about with CinemaCon when we get to next week's show. But anyway, go check out episode 630. It was a lot of fun. Check out Women in Session, new episode tomorrow. So be on the lookout for that as well. All right, thanks for watching, everybody. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time on the In Session Film Podcast. I love Jason Statham. The fake title.